What's going on, guys? Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, and today I'm going to be doing a hand trap tier list post Cyberstorm access, which is still a few weeks away at this point. However, we kind of know what new decks from Cyberstorm access are going to be good and which hand traps are good against them. Like, there's been a lot of, Cyberstorm access testing going around, and we've kind of figured out a lot of stuff that is very good preemptively. Of course, once we're in the middle of that format, I may update this because there are bound to be things that change. And then the biggest elephant in the room is what a banlist is going to do to the format. I think there's a couple of decks in question that could really change up this tier list, whether they get hit or do not get hit. And like one of them, namely for me, is Cyac, because there's certain hand traps of that deck is weak to that maybe not other decks are, and mostly certain cards it can play that other decks can't. And that will sort of reflect on this tier list, because I'll be mentioning sort of potential things that could happen and how to play around them with like what hand traps will be good. So with all that being said, before we hop into this video, I do want to let you guys know Discord link down below along with all of my other social media links, and I'm trying to hit 15,000 subscribers. We recently hit 14K, so thank you guys for that. And if you do enjoy this Yu-Gi-Oh content and you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps me out and what I do here on the channel. And without further ado, let's start ranking some hand traps. Alright, so this tier list, we have Meta, which is the top tier cards you definitely want to play in the main deck or in a side deck if you're playing a deck that doesn't run a lot of hand traps. We have Very Strong, which are cards you probably still want to run in your main or side, but maybe not as good as Meta. We have Solid, which if you're playing a deck with a lot of hand traps, these can definitely come up. Or they're very matchup specific, you might want to have them in your side deck for that. We have OK, which are cards that are okay, but they're probably outclassed by something. And then we have Not This Format, which is hand traps that are just generally not going to be that powerful, and this format isn't like fulfilling their niche either. So starting with something, I don't think I want to go in order of how I have them placed here. Let's put a meta hand trap up first. The first hand trap I want to talk about is actually Ash, because where Ash is in a format, I think really it becomes much easier to base your other hand traps on. Talking about Cyberstorm access, so we can kind of put a frame of reference on this tier list. Right now we have our current format where Ash is a very good card. People are either maining it or siding it, and if they're siding it, it's usually for like the branded matchup. Otherwise you would just main it, and it's pretty good. Going into the next format, the new decks in town are essentially Pearly, and we have Super Heavy Samurai. Those are the decks that are really changing up the meta. Now, a lot of other decks are getting support, and we also have the Mana Dome that are coming to the TCG, and then we also specifically have Gold Pride, which is different than like the meta that the OCG was in a couple of months back. Ash, I think, is still going to be very strong. I don't know if I want to call it meta. Here's the thing. It sort of depends on what deck you're playing and how many flex spots and hand trap spots you get. Because next format and Cyberstorm access in general, it's looking like a hand trap format where you really want to be playing as many hand traps as possible. One, because like if you're playing Super Heavy Samurai, you don't get spells and traps, you definitely need hand traps. Two, there are multiple possible FTKs in the format, with the fact that Super Heavy Samurai can either play the FTK they do have or the Gotham's Hand Loop, which is pretty much an FTK as well. So hand traps become very good in formats like that. And I think Ash is probably still going to be a meta hand trap. She doesn't do anything amazing, but she's definitely a card that you will be maining or siding, like, for sure, because if you're in a hand trap where you're playing 12, or excuse me, if you're in a format where you're playing 12 hand traps in a deck, Ash is just going to end up being one of those, because while she's like low impact on her own, she usually pairs very well with other hand traps. So I think she'll be a pretty meta staple next format. For Bystials, and I know I have a picture of Magnemute here, but this is for all Bystials, usually play them as a package. One thing to note about these with potential banlist hits, we saw that the OCG absolutely destroyed these. Like, we don't know if that's going to happen, and I think it's safe to say it's not going to happen. Bystials are like okay this format as a side deck option for branded or math mech, or you go further down the rogue tier list, things like Drytron, right? And they're solid in the side deck. But they're very matchup specific, and next format there's nothing like really impactful for the Bystials. So I think they'll be solid, but not anything too crazy. Reaper is interesting because if like Cyac is still around and they're not like destroyed this ban list, then Cyac is a deck that could play this because they have a lot of free extra deck spots. Something like Fluandereeze can play this. That being said, is this really what people are going to be playing? I don't really think so. I think it's okay, though. I don't think it's bad. Maybe a side deck card in some decks. Contact C is interesting. I don't think I've given this one enough thought to really rank, so I'm going to be kind of doing this one just like based off theory and off the top of my head. So obviously this format, it's been okay. It kind of, the hype for this card really fell down early in the format. It's overall like not a bad card. Versus Super Heavy Samurai, I don't think it will be that good, especially, I mean, it depends on their extra deck, right? Because if they're not running generic links, then this card could be solid. And then Pearly, it could be very good versus Pearly too, right? The problem is, everyone could just play something like Donner to get around this card, if it's ever in the format. Because of that, I think this card kind of beats itself in a way, where, let's say I think it's very strong, right? Because it hits all the decks. People can just run a Donner in their extra deck, and then this card goes down to here. That being said, there are decks that lock themselves, like Kashtira, into Xyz where this card can dominate. But Pearly, if they just run a Donner, it might be okay. And then things like Super Heavy Samurai can definitely play around this with certain links. I don't think it's inherently terrible, just like looking at the decks. That being said, I don't think you're gonna play this, but it's not so bad to put here. Cycle Reader, absolutely not. This card is only for formats where like Drytron decks are just like super powerful, or any deck like Drytron. DD Crow as well, I don't think is super amazing. I think it's like an okay card versus the decks we have now, but Bystials end up being better. And like next format with the new decks coming into play, I don't think it's that crazy either. I'll put it in okay. I just don't think DD Crow's had a format that is really good since the Bystials came out. The Bystials kind of outclass Crow quite a bit, and that's why you'll find Crow here. The only thing Crow does that Bystials don't is, of course, hit decks like, say, Marincess, for example, or like the very heavy Earthbox strategies we have now, post-Cyberstorm Access, where it can hit things that the Bystials cannot. This can also hit spells and traps, right? But that just hasn't been super relevant. Like, Crow's just kind of okay. All right, here's one of the biggest, like, heavy hitters on this list for sure. Droll is by far a meta staple for Cyberstorm Access with how we're playing the format so far, right? Like I mentioned, a lot of people are testing the format. In most people's testing, people are main decking 3 Droll, because if you look at the format, let's say Kashtira continues being a deck after the banlist, right? Well, Droll's like pretty okay versus them. It's pretty okay versus Sprite. It's good in our current meta, right? And you look at the decks that are coming out, namely Super Heavy Samurai, this is just like a hard turn skip in some hands. There's like a little bit of counterplay that I'll mention further down this tier list. But yeah, Droll is looking phenomenal. And it's not only Droll, like you have the new gold, it's not only Droll, it's not only Super Heavy Samurai, you also have our specific like TCG exclusive Gold Pride stuff. Gold Pride Punk especially gets destroyed by Droll. So if that deck is ever gonna be like big, I think it has some nifty stuff, and I think the deck's actually solid. I do want to mention that. I don't know how good it's going to be, especially with Droll being in the format. Droll is just a hard counter. And then let's say Kashtira gets hit. We lose Macro being in the format, and decks like Dark World and Drytron will be a lot better in that situation as well, where Droll destroys both of those too. And also, there's not a Macro, so Droll is inherently, you know, always live in that case. Droll is going to be insane. I think this is one of the best hand traps by far going into next format, and I don't think that's going to be a surprise to a lot of people. Yeah, a lot of people are going to say Droll is one of the best hand traps for Cyberstorm Access. Effect Veiler is very strong. This hand trap is almost always just as good as Imperm. Obviously, Imperm's the better card, but there are decks that actually will sometimes choose to play Veiler instead of Imperm. Like, especially a deck like Super Heavy Samurai that can't really play spells or traps, it will play Veiler instead if it wants to, or something like Mourner. It's not the best. You maybe even could argue it for solid, but I do think Veiler's just a really good card. It's not bad. Another super heavy hitter next format, I think, is Psyframe Gear Gamma, and there is definitely more reasons than one for this. In a lot of test games, I have seen Gamma actually just destroy Pearly. Like, it hits them pretty hard, especially on like their Lily effect. It's just good, right? It's just a good go second card, you know? Like, it's always insane going second, but going first, it has a lot more uses than even this format per se. One, like, there's a couple decks that are going to stay good, like something like Math Mech, for instance, where they can go Signet Mining and they would normally get Droll and Lockbird, and that would stop their turn. But something like Gamma is the biggest counterplay card to Droll, and when Droll is going to be one of these meta cards in the format, there's a lot of decks that are going to be able to take advantage of using Gamma on their own turn. And that's scary, because if Gamma resolves on your own turn, you probably just win. So Gamma is now really good going first again, really good going second, and it's just a very powerful card. Ghost Mourner, I'm a little bit conflicted whether to put this in very strong or solid. I think it's in one of these. It's just Valor, but a little different. It has some advantages, some disadvantages. I'm willing to say it's a pretty heavy hand trap format. So if you want to play Mourner, I think she's pretty good. I feel like she's above the sort of solid tier of cards, maybe. Yeah, I'm going to put her in very strong, but I do think she's less good than Effect Veiler. Imperm, I'm going to put in meta. I mean, if you're not super heavy Samurai, you're probably going to be playing this card. I mean, the reason you play Imperm over something like these two is because you can draw it as a 6th card, you can activate it any phase, right? Like, Imperm is generically better than these, and I'm going to represent that by putting it in meta. And of course, in a very heavy hand trap format, people might tend to, gravitate towards cards like Triple Tactics Talent, where Imperm can play around that too. So yeah, Imperm's just a little better than Mourner and Veiler. One thing to kind of note with this tier list that I can kind of see the way this is going to go is, like I said earlier in the video, I think next format is a very heavy hand trap format. So we're going to see these sort of all trend towards the top, the upper bracket of the tier list, rather than some of the recent hand trap tier lists where they've been sort of lower in general, because a lot of hand traps are going to be very good. So that's one thing to note while we go through this. Chaos Hunter, I'm going to say not this format. I haven't really looked into this one too much, but this one hasn't even really been that good while we are in a Kashtira format. So this card never really panned out for me, and I'm going to say it's the same going to the next format. Lancia, I think, is a little better than Chaos Hunter, and I think there's some situations where you might want to side deck this card. So I'll put Lancia in okay. I don't think it's bad. I think it's outclassed by more generically good hand traps. There's nothing like specific that Lancia is hitting next format, unless Kashtira is just still a dominant threat. And then maybe you could say it's solid, but I'm gonna put it in okay. Another extremely powerful hand trap going into the next format is Ghost Ogre. It has been a long time since I put Ghost Ogre in meta. But like, honestly, Ghost Ogre and Droll, they have been testing so amazing into next format. It's actually crazy. It's so weird to see these cards doing so well. Ogre can hit so many things as far as like the new decks are concerned, like my friend Pearly in the Pearly matchup, or even just hitting like one of their Xyz monsters could be good, right? Like there's more instances than one that you can use Ghost Ogre. But then also versus Super Heavy Samurai, it hits the Wakaushi, which is very good to get that card hit by Ghost Ogre, because it's like one of their more powerful one-card starters and can stop them really easily. Ogre is just insane. Like, she has been testing so good, and I think Ogre is definitely meta. Yeah, like, I think you just always put Ogre in meta for next format. If Kashtira remains, it's a little different, right? That's one caveat to say. If Kashtira doesn't get hit and Ghost Ogre, it's not that great in that matchup, it's fine. Like, I've still played it in Kashtira format, because hitting things like Birth or Preparations is huge, and I really like Ogre for that. That being said, it's not like amazing versus that matchup, right? So another deck I haven't talked about much is Branded, because it does get support, and I haven't been talking about it as much. Maybe I should have been. I did put Ashe in meta, but this card's like it's not great versus Branded either, but there's definitely things you can hit that aren't bad as well. So I think even if Kashtira stays, we might see Ogre as a meta hand trap. But that is a caveat I wanted to add to this card. And then something like Nibiru I also think could be pretty meta. Again, we're in a hand trap format. Next format is what it's looking like through testing. And yeah, like Nibiru paired with almost any of these is insane. So like a lot of hand trap decks are going to be playing this card. It can, in combination with these, it can hit Super Heavy Samurais, like really powerful end boards. It's a little weird versus Pearly. I've seen them play around it and not play into it at all. It's definitely something to note. It's good versus Kashtira, unless they ban Diablosis, and then they'll probably always go for a Rise Heart Pass, in which this card, there's a chance this card could be in very strong, which is something I want to mention. Like, going into Cyberstorm Access with our current information, and no ban list, I think we could put it in meta, but there's a chance this could be just very strong. That being said, I don't want to count out Nibiru. This card is crazy, and it really depends on how Super Heavy Samurai versus Pearly goes next format. There's also Mana Dome to consider. There's also the Gold Pride Punk deck to consider. and of course, all the decks we have now. This card is pretty okay, especially when we're already running things like Imperm, Gamma, Ogre. Just very powerful card. Phantasme, I'm gonna go ahead and hit this with not this format. This card just hasn't been good in so long. Retaliating Sea is interesting, and this is one I also haven't given too much thought. But thinking about it, this card's crazy versus Pearly. Like, this card is just macro Cosmos once they activate one of their spells. This card could be good. Now, I do want to note here that I just said I haven't thought about this card too much, so my ranking of this card is going to be a little, like, off the rip. Like, I'm just giving my thoughts thinking about it now. Versus Pearly, this card could be insane, and I want that to be known, that this card could be crazy. Versus Super Heavy Samurai, if Wakaushi counts as a spell card that summons, it should, right? I mean, it's a pendulum monster, it's using its pendulum spell effect to summon. It does that, right? This can proc off that. If it can, this card has two really good matchups next format. That being said, if Kashtira sticks around, it's not that good. Does this card also hit Mana Dome? I'm not sure. It can hit Gold Pride Punk as well if they start with something like E-Telly. Otherwise, it's not great versus that matchup. I think this card could be solid to very strong. We'll have to see. This might be the first time this card sees play in a while, because it is very, very good versus specifically the new decks, potentially. Now, for some reason, Wakaushi doesn't let this card be summoned, which I don't know why it would. I don't have the card text in front of me, but I'm pretty sure this would proc off that. Then it's less good, but this card seems like it could be okay. There might be something with this. A big one I wanted to talk about is Dimension Shifter. Now, this one is very banlist dependent, and I sort of referenced it at the beginning. The banlist affects this card a lot, because if Kashtira is still playable, then Kashtira might be good just based on this card, because I think D-Shifter is one of the best cards by far next format, because sort of almost the same how I was talking with this card, but this is for every deck. Like, Shifter is insane. It's a turn skip for things like Math Mech, Pearly almost. I mean, they can do stuff, but they're not doing anything great. Super Heavy Samurai, a lot of rogue decks. Like, Shifter destroys, and I think like Fluunderies and Kashtira might become like playable D-Shifter decks again, where this card carries them beyond belief. Not only the decks does it like hit the decks, but you look at two of the best hand traps. These cards are unusable under D-Shifter, and that's also crazy. Now, Gamma being good, a little scary for Shifter. That being said, I think this is one of the best hand traps going into next meta if your deck can play it. Sneaky Sea, gonna hit that with a not this format. Token Collector, gonna hit it with a not this format. These are not particularly good for anything. Unless like our Punk deck with Gold Pride ends up going like a Brave direction. And even then I wouldn't play this card. Meister is probably around here. Yeah, like, it depends how the sprite hits work. Maybe this card could be okay. Yeah, I mean, it's around DD Crow's tier, I would say. Dogwood, this card always goes in meta for me, and I know that's really weird because we haven't played this card in a while, but I always give the same reason for this card. No card can replace Dogwood. And this card, if your deck does not have a time win condition, is probably the best card in your side deck by far. There's no card that just wins games like Dogwood does. Now, that being said, if your deck doesn't need to play this card, it has a built-in time win condition, then this card can go down here. And then it also depends how long the games are next format. It's looking like there could be some FTKs where the games are decided very quickly, and if Runic gets hit, maybe we're not going into time as often, and then a card like Dogwood loses a lot of efficacy. And maybe you could just say solid to very strong. Games look faster next format, so I'm gonna actually put this in very strong, which is weird for me. That being said, I don't think Dogwood has a replacement, so it's always up here somewhere for me. And then Ghost Bell is probably solid. It's good versus Branded, which is getting support. You know what? Hold on. Let me put this in very strong. I think this is going to be one of the better side deck options in general because Branded will exist and they're going to Expulsion you. More importantly, Math Mech still seems like a very strong deck, and Bell destroys Math Mech. Yeah, like, Bell's going to be okay as a side deck option for certain decks for sure. It's not that great versus the two new meta decks in my opinion, so that's a little weird, but as a side deck option, I'm going to say it's very strong. And that's going to be it for this hand trap tier list. Again, this is sort of preliminary, right? Like, we're not in the format yet, but there's been a lot of testing. There's some things on this list I'm very confident about, like This top row all seems very good to me. Nib is kind of in question. Everything else, like these seem okay. This seems okay. Like, so many hand traps are good. It's skewed so far up, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with this tier list. So let me know what you guys think down below. How would you rank the tier list? What would you change on here? Did I miss anything from the new format? Am I just like silly and not knowing what's good? You know, leave your thoughts down below. I'll be sure to read them. This has been it for me, and I will catch you guys next time. Bye, YouTube.